you know, the eyes on the Miracle Man in that, and yet still the book is a beautiful thing and a powerful experience to read because the art was just so great.
It always surprised me when I first met Jack that he didn't care that much about who inked him. And I think to a certain extent he felt it was like an insult to tell him that his work needed a certain inker. He thought that the story, if the story was all there, he said no professional inker ever ruined the comic. And I think later on he moved away from that because he had so many fans who visited him and tell him, well, I really like it better when it's Joe Sinnott. I really like it better when it's Frank Giacomo or such. At some point then it became Mike Boyer. John, have you met all the people on the panel? You know Walt Simonson?
I think I've met everyone. Yes, I have met everyone. We met some, we have met, yes.
Yes, Mike Boyer.
Oh my God, no, I've never met Mike Boyer. I can't believe I've just touched Mike Boyer's hand. I'm that much closer. And you saw it here. Okay, and Mike has always been, I'm not just saying this, but Mike has always been my favourite Kirby inker. Always. I read that you used to say you didn't want to ink all those books and the Fourth World people when they were coming your way and they were saying, I've got another one for you and another one for you, another one. I'm so glad he bullied you into it because I love that stuff.
It's really funny. I guess I'm the only inker that really kept up with his output. And I kind of evolved this theory just talking to some fans yesterday, is that when Jack and I would talk about old movies, we both loved the Warner Brothers films from the 30s and 40s. He luckily saw them firsthand. I had to wait to TCM. But people ask me who my favorite inker on Jack was, and I'll say Joe Sinnott, who was, I think, the most faithful to him. I would say me, because I inked Jack Kirby's Warner Brothers drawings as a Warner Brothers inker, and Joe Sinnott was MGM.
Yes. You know, I have, it's interesting to compare. I wish I had a picture to show them, but I have some of the work that, you know, I have much of the work done. I have a beautiful book, which is just not just one of the most beautiful examples of Kirby art ever, but also I think the best examples, one of the best examples of inking, which is I'm lucky enough to have all of Commandy Book 6. The cover right through, which was The Death of Flower. And about a third of the way through, there's a beautiful lush landscape scene shot from above down into a valley. And the trees and the rocks, I mean, Eric, you have a whole Commandy book as well. Yeah, we show off to each other. We're like two young men in a restaurant comparing the size of that.
Thanks for coming, I'm out of here.
You've seen it all before. But I also have a page of Orion versus Darkseid, which was inked by Joe Sinnott. And it's fascinating to see Sinnott's inks on Fourth World pencils as well. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. It doesn't work as well to my eye, but it's a lovely thing to see.
When you talk about that, I was thinking of comparing, like, well, you know, the artwork used to be bigger. So, anyway.
I've got one, this is not quite related, but it's about Joe, it's about Jack and Joe, which is, I just wonder if this story is true. You would know it, Steve would know it, because I've heard this story, I told him, and it comes up as a fabulous story. But this is from back, I presume, in the 40s in the shop days. The idea was where Joe Simon apparently told Jack he wasn't being paid to erase. Have you heard this story?
Yes.
Is that true?
I believe it is true.
Awesome.
It's.
Did you tell him the story? That's just a great story.
I think I think you just told it.
Well, I didn't set it up.
The stuff, as I recall, was that Jack had drawn a page and he decided he didn't like it and he started erasing on it. Which he did a lot. He would draw pages over and over to please himself. They were perfectly fine by anybody else's standards. And Joe walked in and said, "What the hell are you doing?" And Jack said, "No, I can do this better." And Joe wanted Jack to do as many pages as possible. He said, "Jack, you're not being paid to erase this stuff. You're being paid to draw it." And one time we were working with Jack. He was drawing an issue of Jimmy Olsen, and there was a pose where Superman was flying out at the audience in a pose that you would have, I'm sure, all recognized. It was a pose that Jack used over and over again, the character kind of flying straight at you, his hands up. And I said, "Oh, you're using," I just being a snotty kid who occasionally said things I shouldn't have said. I said, "Oh, you're using that pose again." And Jack went, "What?" And I said, "You use that." He grabbed it and started erasing that pen. And it was perfectly fine. I wasn't saying don't do it. I was just kind of trying to show off that I recognized that we were using something like that. And he took it out immediately. And it was not, and again, this was during the period of Jimmy Olsen. when he knew that they were going to be redrawing Superman, he was redrawing something that he knew that Murphy Anderson was going to redraw.
Or Al Plastino.
Yeah, this is after the Al Plastino days, and he put maximum effort into every single thing he did to the extent humanly possible. And you've had a question for him.
How did he feel about Murphy Anderson and Al Plastino doing that? And do any of the original drawings of Superman with his face and his chest emblem exist? I would love to see that.
Well, let me tell you, I was going to answer this in the Kirby Collector. Let me tell you a story here that it's never gotten quite right. People understand this. Jack sent in, the order that Jack did his work for DC, you can figure out by looking at those little X numbers on the page, and I think John has printed a guideline to them. It's very close to the order he did them in. Those are the billing numbers. That's for when he was paid for them, which is almost identical to the order he did them in. There might be one item variance occasionally, and I believe the very first thing he did for DC was a couple of covers for Forever People and New Gods and Mr. Miracle. And he did the first issue of Forever People and the first issue of New Gods and the first issue of Mr. Miracle. And then he went over and started drawing Jimmy Olsen issues. These are months and months before these books went to press. They came in, DC quietly, without showing them to their other editors in the office. They didn't want this material to leak. They gave them to John Costanza a letter, and when John brought them back, they were hidden from the other editors. And then they went off to Vince Coletta to ink. When Steve Sherman and I went up to the DC offices in July of 1970 for the first time, and remember that the first Forever People didn't go on sale until December, so we were way ahead of press date. Julia Schwartz sat us down. Remember this, Steve? Julia Schwartz sat us down and said, "What is this Forever People, New Gods thing that's going on? Tell me about it." Now, his office was about 8 yards from Carmine's, and the work was passing by. They wouldn't even show it to Julie Schwartz in the office, who was their senior editor. And so, by the way, if anybody tells you that everything Vince Coletta ever did was rushed and done at the last minute, he had 6 months to do those books. They did the first issues of Forever People had Superman in it. Some people there at DC looked at it and said, "This is not quite right. Vinny, could you try to fix it when you do the inking?"
Oh, God.
Yeah. And some people in the office and the production staff had gone over some of the pencils and they had modified the work. They had tried to do the Superman emblem over on the pencil stage and get some corrections, and Vinny did more. Mr. Coletta, I happen to think he gets a bum rap an awful lot, but he was asked, I think he was frequently asked to do stuff that was above his pay grade. And he came back with this Superman, and more people in the office worked it over, and it was a committee-created Superman. And finally, when the books were all done, they looked at it and said, "No, we ruined it." There is someplace out there, because I have seen it, a set of stats of the book before Al Plastino got to it, and it's not Jack either. It was inked by Vinny, and it was reworked. It was a couple of Kurt Swan heads in it that I think someone in the office swiped and tried to change. And they looked at it, they said, "This is not really working for us. We can't set it up this way." And I think there was a feeling they couldn't at that point go back to Jack and ask him to re-pencil those things because, you know, this was 1970 DC. The office didn't make mistakes, only the freelancers did. And so they brought Al Plastino in. Now, this is weird irony in this. It's like, here's 1970. We're going to try to bring forth a new Superman. We want Jack Kirby to help us show how to bring Superman into a new era. Oops, let's get the guy who's been drawing Superman from 1946 to redraw it. An artist who we fired off the comics because we think his work looks old-fashioned. You didn't see Al Plastino drawing Superman at that time.
No.
But he was cheap. And he was a guy who was around, and he wanted to give us some work. And he redrew it. He repasted over on those, on Forever People #1 and on the first 2 Jimmy Olsens. At that point, they had to do them all at the same time. He did them all the same day, brought them back. And that's what was printed there. Subsequently, they would tell Vinny, leave the Superman heads and the Jimmy Olsen heads, and we'll have them inked in the office. And Murphy Anderson was the guy in the office. He was the only person on, he was not on staff, he just did his freelance work in the office. And every so often they go to him and say, "Here, you know, Murphy, we need this cover retouched." If a retouch came in that was above the pay grade of the the office staff, they would give it to Murphy. And Murphy's retouches turned up in Lois Lane at that time, and a few other books as well. So that's how it came about. It was this committee phase process. And they redid it, and he didn't have
Well,
it.
I'd like to add, Mark, that
Yeah.
when I finally got to ink some of the Jimmy Olsen, I don't know who I spoke to, Jack, or you, or Steve, or somebody, but I said, look, I can fix those S's. I can tweak the Superman and the Jimmy Olsen phases, and at least it'll all be inked from the same hand. So the Olsens that I worked on, I made those corrections.
Yes.
Correction is the right word. Jack was an impressionist, and he gave his impression of the S, and it was his Superman. But I felt if I made the changes, at least there would be a consistency in the finished look.
And I happen to think that if those books had been inked in the first place by Wally Wood, who wanted to ink them, or they'd been inked by Frank Giacoya, who wanted to ink them, they would have gone through fine with Jack's work on it.
Do you know, Mark, how did it come about that Adams did some inking on some of the covers there?
Neil just grabbed them. He said, let me save these. Neil was a very powerful force in the DC offices at that time. He had no official title. They would come up there and do retouches occasionally, or he was like the artistic conscience. A lot of why DC Comics of 1970 and 71, around that period, looked so good is Neil Adams. They also looked good because Carmine, whatever else I think of him, he was a great designer. He was a brilliantly talented artist, and when he was at his full ability to apply himself, and he wasn't running around looking at sales figures all day, he was a very bright, clever designer who knew how to he brought in a lot of wonderful new talent to those books too.
This is a bit about Carmine, if I might, it's Jack, but about the design element of Carmine. There was what was the zine that DC put out, The Wonderful World of DC Comics, something
The
like
Amazing
that.
World of DC
Amazing World of DC Comics. One of those is a cover, and it's got all the Carmine's villains, they're all sitting around a table, and they're talking, it's that book there. They're all sitting, the ink version trying to all sit at a table, like the Captain Cold, and different villains and so on. They're all Rod the Gorilla, and they're all sitting. It was up in Continuity, which was Neil Adams, Ditko Jones' studio. I was there one day, it was a clubhouse for all those young guys in comics at the time, in the early 70s. They had that cover, and some of the other young guys, some of the gophers and stuff in the office, were kind of making fun of it because it was Carmine. It wasn't Neil, it wasn't Jack, or whatever it was. They're making fun of it. On the back of the cover rail, somewhere in the magazine, they had Carmine's rough of the drawing, which was his rough sketch and the stuff. And Neil said, no, you guys are wrong. He says, look at this. He pulls out the rough, and he shows it. And he shows the negative space of the table, with everybody's elbows on it, and their hands, and their poses to it. And the entire negative shape of the table, which is this very irregular white shape in the center of the drawing, completely holds the drawing locked into place. And you can see Carmine's design as clearly as if he'd said the arrows and said, design, design here. It made a beautiful drawing, a beautiful visual. It was less visible in the inks, which I think somebody else had done. But it was clearly, Mark said, one of Carmine's best talents was he was spectacular at drawing and designing stuff with shapes. He was a phenomenal shape artist. I'm sorry, I just didn't get it.
You just reminded me of a moment, one of my favorite moments from an early Comic-Con here, that it's not even exactly relevant, I'm going to stick it here anyway. This was the third year of the Comic-Con. We're sitting at the fourth year at the Harbor Island Hotel, Sheraton Harbor Island. Neil Adams is sitting by the pool doing sketches for fans. And kids are around him throwing questions out about comics as he's drawing stuff. And one kid says, why do they allow crappy artists like Don Heck in comics? And there was a pause, and Neil turned to him and said, you know, if they had put me on those books with those inkers and jerked me around like that, you'd be sitting here right now asking Don Heck why they put crappy artists like Neil Adams in comics. Neil would this is a story I won't get into. When Steve and I went to the DC office that day, I delivered Alex Coe's original art for Hot Wheels #5, that famous story that was there. And Saul Harrison looked at it and went, we got to change this. We got to take all the black out from between the panels. And Neil came in and talked them out of it. Now, Neil did not get credit for this. Neil saved an awful lot of DC comics over the years. And the reason he inked those covers...
Is that the Cord story?
The Cord story, yes. Yeah, they had there was a man on staff at DC named Sal Amendola, who some of you know. and they'd given Sal this story and said, take the black out. We don't do that in DC. We don't put black between the panels. Take them out. And Sal came to me and he said, I don't know what to do about this. I don't want to deface this. And we talked for a few minutes. He came up there and he said, I'm going to stall till Neil gets here. And Neil walked in. He went in and showed it to Neil, and Neil went, hold on. He took the art into Sal Harrison's office and came out 10 minutes later and said, don't take the black out. And that's the kind of thing.
You had mentioned two people, Carmine and Alex, and I have these memories that just are etched in my brain. And one evening, sitting on the floor at Alex's house with Carmine, and just sitting there and listening to these guys talk about their experiences in design and so on, and I asked Carmine, because I'm 20-something and just in the business, and said, exactly how do they color these comics? And he said, it's magic, kid.
I also remember, and Mike may have repressed this memory, on that same trip in 1970, Mike was back with us. Mike, Steve, and I shared a hotel room about the size of this table. And at the Statler Hilton, which I've stayed at recently, has not been cleaned since. And Mike was taking up samples to maybe get the job of inking some of Jack's stuff for DC. And he took it up to the DC offices, and there was this editorial gangbang of tearing it down and saying this man is not good enough to work for us. And it was clearly not the work. It was clearly the fact that they didn't want Jack to have his own inker in LA and have that control. And they didn't like, and that was at that time in DC, it was kind of a very snotty attitude. If you're not already working for us, you must not be very good. You know, I had a very memorable art exchange one time with a man named Sal Harrison, the production head, where he actually said to me, he was talking about how crappy all the art in the Marvel comics was. And I said, well, do you think John Buscema and Gene Colan are bad? Yeah, well, we wouldn't take that work at DC. And then I said, because I mean, I am, I said, well, Gil Kane's working for both companies. Are you telling me that the Gil Kane art for DC is excellent art and the Gil Kane art for Marvel is crappy art? And he said, it's exactly what I'm telling you. The quote was, Gil knows he can't get away with having that shit into us. So that was the mentality. So Mike's work was belittled. It's like Carmine was calling other people into the office and saying, tell us why we don't like this, tell us why this is good. And then after he left the office, feeling very dejected, all those people kept coming up to Mike and telling him, we really like what you did a lot.
Well, it's funny, when Jack left Marvel, we met by me inking stuff for him from Marvel Mania. I mean, this memorable phone call. Like, why are this is Jack Kirby? Alex Toll says you're a pretty good inker. I went to his house the next day. I thought I would take the work home, and he says, just sit here at the board and do it. It's like, well. And, you know, every few minutes he'd come and look over my shoulder, talk about intimidation. But it's like, but all of a sudden I was family, you know, having sandwiches made by Roz. Anyway, of course, he came back from New York, and he said, well, I always wanted you along, but it didn't work out that way. So when I went back with Mark and Steve to New York, I walked into Carmine's office. And I go, I could do a better job than Vince Coletta's doing. And at lunch, Dick Giordano says, you better be careful, Mike. You're getting a reputation for being cocky.
but Dick was one of the guys who sought you out the hallway afterwards and said he liked what you did.
What was that?
Dick was one of the people who came up to you afterwards, after that meeting where they were tearing your work apart, and said, I really, really like what you did. And it was very wonderful samples. Now, we're talking here about inkers ruining Jack's work and changing it or whatever. One of the few things late in his career that Jack did that came out exactly the way he intended it, because it wasn't ink, was a story called Street Code, which ran the Chevrolet version revival of Argosy magazine. We have on the dais the publisher of that magazine, Richard Kyle. And before I get to that, Richard, is it true, someone told me last night that you were walking down through the convention wearing dark glasses the other day, and someone came up to you and said, Stan Lee, but can I have your autograph?
Yes, it's true, and I'm wearing the sunglasses, but I don't know whether it'll work here, but let's just give it a try. Now, this is me before I become Stan Lee.
tell us how Street Code came to be? Would you get a little closer to the microphone or pull it closer to you, please?
I will with your help because I personally can never remember the date in my life, and so I don't know what the year was. I think it was 82 maybe, when...
I think a little before that, but not much before that. 80,
well, 80 what?
I think it was about 1980.
Okay. In 1980 at the Comics Convention, I got an Inkpot Award that I didn't expect at all. It really surprised me. And so I had talked it over with a couple of people. I think conceivably I mentioned it to Mike, that Jack's pencils were really extraordinary. In the early days, however, you couldn't shoot from them. The printing processes at that time just didn't really allow for good reproduction. The offset, the reproduction that I think they have now, wasn't there. And Mike had also told me that Jack started his career drawing twice up, that is twice the size of the printed page. And he felt, and I think once he said it, I started examining it closely. He thought that something had been lost because Jack was continuing to draw at twice up, but he was putting them on 1.5 time up pages. And when but I never could quite catch it because I could see that there was some similarity, but then DC came out with the digest-sized books. And you can really see it on the digest-sized books. There was another artist, not Mike, who was working it, and he tended to oversimplify his line. And so really the digest-sized, what's the war book?
Losers.
Yeah, the Losers. You can see it in the digest versions of the Losers, and it really looks remarkable. It in some ways is better as art, despite the reduction, than some of the stuff that Jack was doing at the time, because I don't think that he ever quite made the transition from 1.5 to 2. But anyway, I was...
Richard, excuse me, let me interrupt you for 1 second. I'm going to give the gentleman, Mike Catron, who's videotaping this, needs to change. We don't want to lose any important.
There are going to be great evil stories, right? This is the time to tell them. Right now.
Let's all cuss. Right?
Can I say something? I think Jack would be appalled that Stan Lee is charging $50 for an autograph.
I think Jack would be appalled that Stan is trying to $50 for an autograph unless Jack was getting $70. Thank you. Okay, Richard Brazil, I'm sorry.
Well, in any event, I talked to people about it, and I thought that, well, there ought to be a story that was done in Jack's pencils, because he pencils so tightly and everything. And I didn't entirely approve of the work that was being done for him. And this is post-Mike. We're not talking about anything Mike did, because I think that he is the best of all of the Kirby painters. I really wanted to see what it would look like with modern printing technology to shoot Jack's pencils. And so anyway, I received the inkpot. And we went into a large kind of a common room there, sitting down, and everybody was talking, and by just pure good fortune, I was seated across the room with Jack and Ron. And Jack reminisced a lot about when he was and I said to him, because I was going to publish a magazine that had not yet come out, and I was planning it. And I said, would you be interested in doing an 8 or 10-page story about your youth in the Bronx, just the way it was, without any articles, without anything, just the way it was. And Jack had, it was curious, there was this expression of eagerness on his face. And I told him that I would pay him his current going rate, which I couldn't afford, but nonetheless. But anyway, there was this look of eagerness on his face, and he turned after a moment she was emphatic about it. I mean, she really supported the idea. And so because of Roz, maybe Jack would have finally agreed, but Roz was the clincher. So we signed the contract, and I paid, the agreement was half up front and half with books completed. And, or maybe it was just all up front. I really don't know, but I had great confidence in Jack. And, but I was, I really had no experience with people who were on that level of publishing in the world, and I just didn't know how closely they would meet deadlines and everything. Well, Jack and I agreed on 30 days, and 28 days later, the entire thing was in my hands, and it was just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And it wouldn't have worked for superheroes or anything that was out of size, that particular technique. But for what Jack was doing, the story about his youth abroad, an incident from his life abroad, it was just really everything I wanted and it was more. And I had only put a restriction of 10 pages, well, 8 or 10, Jack immediately took 10. But I only put that restriction on it because this was toward the end of Jack's very active career. And I was uncertain whether or not, because he was not quite doing the same things in some of the Pacific comics. He wasn't doing the breakdowns and layouts. Apparently that was just an experiment. I gave him the 10 pages when I really wanted to give him 100 pages and put myself in hock for life. And so anyway, I got it, and I got the pages. I was just absolutely enamored of them, and there was an illness in my family. And I had to drop the plans for the magazine. And it was not until, if I'm not mistaken, it was 1991, I believe, wasn't it, Mark, that I was able to print it finally? It was
late.
It was a long time, but there was just no way I could do it. I couldn't, there wasn't any way I could finance it. And Ross, when I finally published it, I did the ad and did everything, and I didn't say anything to the Kirbys about it, until the first ads came out, and then I immediately told them that. And Ross said Jack was reading the ad in the Comics Journal, and he said he thought it was a good ad. He thought it was the right kind of ad. And so then I said, I've had this for all this time. She said, yes, we could have given this project to someone else. And they could have. I mean, here for 9 years or whatever it was, there was this really remarkable story by Jack that anybody could have taken it. But she said, but we didn't do it. And so I said, well, because it's been all this time, I'm just going to pay you the original amount over again. And which I eventually did, but it was a difficult time. But it was this look of eagerness on Jack's face, just this extraordinary eagerness that you got, and then the kind of self-control of stopping there and turning to Roz, because she was his advisor, and she was just an extraordinary woman. I don't have any more of a story there. It's not mentioned in any program, but I think it tells you about Jack and Roz, and also about their support of me during a very, very long time when they didn't have to. 7 years have passed, at least, and the contract would surely be annulled by that. And I can't imagine anybody else who would do that. Nobody.
Let us thank Richard Kyle for what I think is the last great Kirby story. Richard, I know Richard a long time. He has always been a class act, and I think that Jack respected him tremendously for the bookstore even. He loved that bookstore you had in Long Beach. He loved going down there and looking at what foreign publishers were doing with comics.
One of there was a man named Erik Larsen who was a French artist, and his technique, the technical aspects of his technique weren't Jack's. But his imagination was Jack's. And there were two books about the adventures of Lone Sloan that came out, and in hardback, and that we carried, and Jack and Ross came in one day, and Jack was piling up all the books that he wanted because he just liked the look of the other artists, especially the European ones that were just being discovered then. And he says, "This is my kind of guy." And I can't do the New York accent. I mean, if Mike can do it or something, we get to get Jack right, but it's, that's my kind of guy. I just can't do it. But you get the idea. And so Philippe Drouet, who had a good reputation and sold very well in Europe and all of that, nonetheless, he had a recommendation Jack Kirby, and I don't think that could have hurt his sales. One good.
We got a few more minutes here, and I'm going to go take this a little bit longer. If you all promise me that when we finish, you'll leave and we'll linger in the room because we're in front of the panel. Jonathan, we always ask people, what was the first Jack Kirby work they fell in love with? What did you get over in the UK?
We had very patchy distribution of Marvel and DC comics in the UK for many years. In the early 70s when Jack was at DC came over more readily than Marvel. We used to get Marvel books over these and whatever's ballast on ships, so you would find them and they'd be warped off from the water, which it kind of added to the charm. But I managed to get, we used to have junk shops, I don't know what you call them over here, but second-hand shops where people would sell off their collections, and so I found some Kirby books there. First book I bought, I think, was it was either Fantastic Four 67 or 68, where Warlock, where him first appears. One of those, but it had a great big 3 in black felt tip when it was the cover. They all had that, and I read it, blown away, but went back and bought as many more Marvel books that they had there as well. And the earliest book they had FF3 there with no cover, which I bought, and I still have that copy. And for many years, I thought that would be my retirement fund. I didn't know you needed the cover for it to be worth the money, but I still got that FF3. So it was the early Fantastic Four stuff, really, which I still think is that for someone to have produced a run of that length, of that quality, with no actual dips at all, and still towards the end, up to book 100, 101, still remarkable storytelling, remarkable character work, as well as remarkable design. That's a feat which, and I know we have, two of the greatest artists working at the moment. I mean, Walt Simonson's work on New York, one of the few artists I think who really good work, characters and all that, and also Erik's work, which is so informed by Jack, that fills me with each the same excitement from Jack stuff, but even so, I think very few people could achieve what Jack managed to do, and obviously would stand to credit for.
Are there any quick questions here from someone who's never asked, who hasn't asked anything before? Sir?
I just want to say thank you. I know it's a labor of love that you do this panel every year.
Let's not talk about me, let's talk about Jack.
Question I want to find out, the panel described as some still hail as the king of comics. With this being Captain America movie year and the 50th anniversary of Fantastic Four, why aren't there 40-foot posters of Jack's portrait hanging in there? And can I write next year's description?
You can write next year's description. I don't know. I try to always make this modest because, and I can't say too much about this, but here's what happens now. If I, in a fanzine 28 years ago, said, Jack usually ate cheeseburgers, I find myself in a deposition room with someone saying, are you sure he ate cheeseburgers and not hamburgers? Are you willing to swear on an oath here? I have to be real careful with my wording these days. Another question. Anybody else? Yes?
This question for Erik. I was wondering what got you into Kirby, and what of Kirby's work did you kind of consciously bring into your own?
as much as I possibly could.
Like particular aspects?
No, I mean just the power of it, the storytelling, the design. I mean, kind of everything as much as possible, really. I mean, every morning I wake up and look in the mirror and I'm a little disappointed that I'm not seeing Jack Kirby. But the first work I saw of his was Command.
Can I ask Mike a quick question?
Sure, yes.
Mike, I've always been keen to know, you did some inking on what, I don't know if it was published, the Days of the Mob 2, the black and white work that Kirby was doing when he was at...
Yeah, he had the entirety of Days of the Mob 2.
Yeah, was that published Days of the Mob 2?
No.
Well, when it was printed in one of those DC House fanzines, they redid all of my lettering. But I got some very nice compliments from Richard when I inked that, because my whole mindset was the Kirby that I grew up with as a kid, the Boys Ranch and the Bullseye and all that stuff. And it was like, I'm doing Simon and Kirby.
I can see, I always felt that was stuff that, we were talking about Street Code when he was back doing the gangster stuff. I thought that was something, obviously, that Jack, because a lot of the things he saw on the street, we understand, informed his work, his time in the army. And I wonder whether, because he was working black and white, because that was 1.5 size up, and I've seen some of the earlier work. I know the unpublished Soul Love book, that was twice up. The artwork for that. Soul Love, it was...
No, it was 11 by 15, but not 10 by 15.
Oh, so slightly bigger.
Slightly bigger, yes.
And I think, even though we never saw that published, actually Vince did do a lovely job on some of that. I mean, it was actually, some of that was lovely art. Really,
Vince did a better job before they went back to, gave it back to him. He inked the book and they gave it back to him and said, make the men look more like, remember Steve, do you remember this? They make the men look more like Sidney Poitier and the women look more like Diane Carroll.
you can see they tried to make them more Caucasian looking.
Yeah, and if you see the originals, they're online in various places, you'll see an awful lot of white out on the faces.
Yeah.
That's obliterating not only Jack's work, but Vince's as well. He was kind of victimized to a certain extent.
The question I had for Mike.
I was working Days of the Mob. I didn't care what Jack drew. No matter what it was, there was just this incredible power and strength. Let me tell you how intimidating it was in the old days of special delivery. For me to open a package from Jack, and the first thing was to be engulfed with the aroma of Roy Tan cigar. And then to look at those pages and go, God, this is great, and gee, don't screw it up.
Did he want to work with wash now, or did he think about having more texture? Because I wanted just the possibility of it being printed in magazine. I think it was still the pulpy paper, it wasn't like modern stuff, but Warren books at the time, obviously, and I guess Jack might have been influenced by that or inspired by that in some way, because they had a lot of wash work, a lot of tone work in there. And I wondered, did he intend that in the pencils, or did he?
Well, Mark could probably tell you about the aborted Kirby Comics project. That's what Galaxy Green pages were done for.
Well, I can tell you, we're out of time here, unfortunately, so we'll have to continue this in another case here. I'm going to ask everybody, as we finish here, after I thank everybody, would you please, instead of coming up to the stage, would you please just leave the room so that the next panel can get in here and they don't yell at me and give me less time next year. Would you join me in thanking Mr. Erik Larsen?